Okay, welcome everyone to Contemporary Issues. Glad to have you here today. And we are going to talk about Christian nationalism today. Ron and I thought this would be a good topic. Obviously, it's a continuing topic in the world because there are many countries that have religious nationalism. Saudi Arabia is a Muslim nationalist state. Israel maybe could be considered a Jewish religion state, where the laws and that we can talk about that too. Some are shaking their heads no. So we're going to find out what it is and what are the pros and cons. And so thank you to Ron for preparing this. And but our announcements, regular announcements first. Zoomers, welcome, and please mute yourself on the lower left corner of your screen when you're not talking. And we are recording this for future playback. And especially today, because we are talking a political type topic, please be kind to our speaker and to each other, and in your comments, recognize that we have folks here who are on the left and the right, in the middle of our political spectrum, and they would appreciate sensitive comments. We know that this topic can be very volatile and draws folks from a lot of folks will say from the conservative side, but there are also those who are extremists from the other side. So please keep that in mind. And any other announcements? Great sermon today. I want to just say I thought Mark had a very thoughtful sermon today. If you haven't heard it, anybody online too, listen to it about how God is love and how that has to be shown in concrete ways. And we sometimes forget that. My wife is saying yes.
I don't like some talking.
Okay, good point. Mark is saying he gives his wife sunflowers, but I want to get a plug for the sermon today. It was very thoughtful. Any other thoughts? Okay, with that, Ron, thank you for this good topic.
Okay, well, this is a broad one, and like Steve said, it's a tough one because it does have some political connotations, and like most subjects, there's gray areas. You can't draw an exact line and have a precise set of statements that says this is exactly patriotism, this is exactly nationalism. So there's some boundaries there. Let's get started. We get our first slide.
Hey, Ron.
Yeah.
Okay. I was gonna say, could you give the definition of both of those two things?
Yes, we will.
Okay.
We'll
good.
get into that.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, we're going to pass out three of the books that we referenced today. The Flag and the Cross. I'll pass this over. Jesus and John Way, and The Power Worshippers. There's many other books we'll talk about, but let's get going. In this opening slide, we show some rallies or demonstrations where Jesus has been brought into the demonstration. You can see the flags and the banners there. You can see the Bible with the bullet on it, implying that guns and violence are part of the Bible and voting. Also want to point out, we're talking white Christian nationalism. There are some other countries where they have Christian nationalism, or in some cases, well, Islamic nationalism, other religious nationalisms. So you can vary the subject. You can also change the white. We in America are still predominantly an Anglo-white composition, but you can change white into something else as you travel abroad in some other countries. So we could talk about this white Christian nationalism in many ways. We could substitute a different religion and substitute a different race. But which brings up the question, what did Jesus really look like? And most scholars feel like Jesus probably had brown eyes, dark brown to black hair, and olive brown skin. And that's kind of in contrast to a lot of the pictures shown. Michelangelo, I don't know if you can see the picture of the Virgin Mary hidden by the thing, but they show her, particularly they like to draw the Virgin Mary artistically with an extremely creamy white complexion. That's undoubtedly not what she looked like. And the same thing with Jesus. So, next one. Okay, we've looked, there are some of the books that are going around. We'll try to answer some of the questions. What is white Christian nationalism? When did it emerge? How does it work politically, and where might it be headed? Next slide. We want to quickly talk about, when we say the word Christian values in America, or putting Christianity into our government, we have to ask the question, are we talking about putting solely Christian concepts into our government? Or are we talking about putting universal human moral values into our government? And of course, there's hopefully tremendous overlap between many, maybe even most religions and the universal human values. But when they ask me, do you want Christian values in government? I say, yeah, but I'm thinking of the universal human values. I'm not thinking of necessarily a crucifix or communion cups. I'm thinking justice, mercy, love. That's what I'm thinking.
No 10 Commandments in the lawn?
That's the next slide. So the white Christian nationalism, what they call deep story, and this is what a lot of organizations in this country are saying right now, and it doesn't sound so bad upon first reading, but then as you start thinking about it, you say, you gotta be careful here. Some claim America was founded as a Christian nation by white men who were traditional Christians and based the nation its founding on Christian principles. Again, what do we mean by Christian principles? The United States has been blessed by God, which has made it so successful, and the nation, has a special role to play in the advancement of humanity. These blessings are threatened by cultural degradation from un-American influences, both inside and outside. So you read it and you got to deep think it to really interpret it. So let's deep think it a little bit. We want to mention a book that we will cover a little bit. The chief rabbi of Great Britain just passed away, but he's written a book on morality, and it's getting rave reviews. We'll touch on it when we particularly talk about Lincoln.
What's the title?
Simply Morality.
What's the name of the?
And the author, Jonathan Sachs. Okay, but he talks about how, yes, we do need moral principles in our government. And he talks about a liberal morality, which focuses on providing the group's well-being and ensuring social justice, and a conservative morality that focuses more on protecting the group from threats and preserving order. And in this new book, it said, this is a review of it. He says he thinks the morality we need should be based on we, not I. So more to come on that book. Next one. Okay, Formula for a Great Nation. There's another great book, Why Nations Fail and Collapse. And it looks deeply into what makes a nation succeed or fail. And the author gives examples of how nations seemingly with the same resources and peoples, some of them succeed and some of them fail. Why? And we'll also look at that in later lessons. Next slide. Okay, let's get right on to.
I'm reading that book, Guns, Germs, and Steel. That you had on the.
Yeah.
You referenced it. I bought it at the Smithsonian. It's really good.
Okay.
Excellent book.
Yeah. In general, that author has some good stuff. Okay, so white Christian nationalism, again, it starts to believe that America must be Anglo-American dominant. We got to be careful what we mean. Well, what do you mean by dominant? Give Christianity and here's a dangerous word, privileged position in government and culture. So we got to be careful when we start talking about making Christianity and making the white race dominant and privileged. That's where the trouble comes in. Some in this movement dislike cultural pluralism and dislike those who do not conform to the preferred cultural template. Now, I don't care for people who don't like my moral cultural template. When people are thieves, liars, and do evil, but it's another thing not to like somebody because they use chopsticks or because they like sushi instead of a hamburger. So we got to be careful, and you can substitute the word religious for cultural. And we're finding now in history, historically, nationalist governments tend to become authoritarian and oppressive. And Christian white nationalism tends to treat other Americans as second-class citizens. Okay, next
Ron?
slide. Yeah.
Ask a quick question. You probably will cover this, but do the folks who favor white nationalism, do they understand that America was founded on not having a religion, a state religion, and treating all minorities equally and fairly?
We've got a slide coming up. Okay, real soon.
I knew that was the way for
Yeah. Okay, next one. Real quickly, some of the white Christian nationalism is a response to fear. Fear of change, fear of losing power, fear of being told being wrong, and fear of white supremacy. Next slide. If you're a good history student, here's some good books to look at on the removal and the mistreatment of indigenous Americans. The book Trail of Tears, the book The Seminole Wars, and the Centennial Campaign, the Sioux Wars out here in Colorado, Wyoming, Kansas, Nebraska in the 1870s. Next one. Okay. Now, here's the slide we're getting to.
Okay.
Here's a fact. Facts against the Christian nationalism of the story. Fact. The religious views of the founding fathers varied greatly. They ranged from atheism through deism. Deism means you believe in a God, but you're not linked into a specific religion, Christianity or Islam or whatever.
That was Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah.
And Washington.
Right. Unitarian, they varied from a Unitarian to a Congregationalist, Baptist, and Roman Catholics. The Declaration of Independence and the Constitution drew from various forces and influences, including classic liberalism of John Locke, civic republicanism, Machiavelli, the
I
Italian,
didn't know that.
and that's another. And if you study Rome, tremendous amount of American law and legal customs and rules come from the Roman practice. They had senates, they had trials, they had evidence. The Romans made a tremendous impact on Western democracy. And there's other sources. And much of the nation's wealth arose from stolen land and slave labor. We might mention that the greatest asset of the American South prior to the Civil War, hands down, was monetary value of slaves.
Yeah.
Totally dominant. No other industry or thing came close to that.
More than cotton.
Right.
Yeah.
And when I read in books of a slave being bought in New Orleans for $1,200, you think in 1850, that was a huge amount of money. Okay. So John Locke is often credited as the founder of modern liberal thought. Locke pioneered the ideas of natural law, social contract, religious toleration, and has had a major influence on our Constitution. Next slide. Each of these guys wrote up a first draft of the Declaration of Independence. And when Jefferson presented his first, the other two, Franklin and Adams, they were working together, small group. They thought it was so good, they said, we don't need to even look at our two. You've hit it so well. All we need to do is a little bit of editing and drafting on yours. So, but Franklin certainly was not a classical Christian.
No.
He had
He got out the Bible and made his own Bible and took out the miracles.
or that was Jefferson.
That was
Yeah,
Jefferson,
I'm sorry.
carved out.
Jefferson Bible.
Yeah, and Franklin, if you read his adventures in France, yeah, he was certainly not a classic Christian. And I've got to do a little more research on John Adams. But there were diverse sources. Next slide. Okay. We of course have to be careful when Christianity amalgamates itself with a political agenda. And it's popular to do in certain, particularly in certain areas of the country or in certain settings. If you can get religious believers underneath you and behind your political movement, it can help a great deal.
Anita Bryant.
Of course, it can also cause horrific embarrassment. I've got a little picture there of the Westboro Baptist Church in Topeka, Kansas.
Oh,
And if you haven't heard what those folks, I haven't heard much of them recently,
No.
but oh my
Probably
gosh,
passed away.
yeah. What's
I
that?
think you're
That
right.
minister probably passed away.
Probably did, but whew, what an
There was
embarrassment.
only about 20 people. on that.
And we all know, and in our life today, we probably saying, oh, no, I can't believe this person is a proponent and professing Christian undergirding. So when the political movement embraces something that's unjust, lies, angry outbursts, racist, sexism, homophobia, and grabs from the dark side, it tears down the name of Christianity. And we've seen a good bit of that in the last decade. As Gandhi said, there in India, I like your Christ, I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ. And that reminds us of, unfortunately, many examples today.
Yeah.
Because there are TV evangelists and other people that go on and we say, oh my gosh.
Yeah, they talk a lot about Christianity, but they don't talk about the teachings of Christ.
Do you think John Brown would fit into that second bullet?
That's a whole subject. Yeah, he murdered some folks,
Yeah.
but he also had some, it's a whole subject. Okay,
Whole nother subject.
excellent. A little data. We see more Christian nationalism coming from the right, and that's not throwing darts at people who are on the right. But if you, on the question, do you believe in God right now, the 2022 category, we can see 92% roughly of Republicans believe in God. It drops down to a lower number for independents and an even lower number for Democrats. So it's no surprise that more people of conservative and Republican leanings are engaged some in the white Christian nationalism. Okay.
Yeah,
Excellent.
That's just in 5 years. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yeah. Okay.
What does the First Amendment of the Constitution say?
I can read that for you.
Make no law
Shall make no
regarding
law
the establishment of religion.
Right. Yeah. And of course, on an international scale, we all shudder in horror when we see what particularly some of the Islamic nations have done. I mean,
Yeah, you could look at the history of Europe and see the wisdom of separation of church and state.
I'm not sure you're.
okay. How Christians can be involved without becoming a nationalist. Our church and just about every church now is having some struggles with how much politics do we bring in? And of course, on a really fine scale, on a gross scale, you can't completely separate religion and politics. If a political party takes a position that's against liberty and life and things, You simply can't pretend that it isn't happening. And it's gotten tough. It's gotten tough for this church. It's gotten tough for churches across the whole country. They're having struggles with where do we draw the line between religion and politics, and what's the right balance? It's not easy. Let's talk for a minute about, we think the right position is to advance Christian principles, not Christian power, Christian culture. Christianity, paraphrasing one of the Bible verses, is a gathering of people from every tribe, people, and language. And we can definitely, these are points taken from a Christianity Today article that's been passed around. Here's some of the things you can do to become politically engaged, where you take what I call basic principles, universal moral principles, and work for them. And again, sometimes it's a tough line. There are some that are kind of a gray area, but some of them are loving our neighbors, pursuing justice, and that can and should mean fair voting laws, equality under law, non-discrimination by any factor, promoting religious liberty, protecting rule of law, honoring constitutional processes, protecting the environment, and working to reduce gun violence. And speaking out on abortion, and that can be either way. I respect the right of people with religious undergirdings to make their expressions on either side of it. Thoughts in the class. How can you become politically involved and not embarrass your faith and your religious concepts? Any thoughts out there?
Well, as taxpayers, I mean, our money goes to some Christian education in what would normally be in public schools, a Christian school, a privately owned school. I don't think as a taxpayer, even as a Christian, that my money should go to promote that type of education.
You're talking about the vouchers that came out
Okay.
10 years ago.
Okay,
I agree.
all right.
And you agree as a Christian?
Yes.
We could
There's a
even,
lot of people from different parts of the world with different religious faith that become good Americans. You know, particularly from Asia.
Mhm. And it's recognized our country is somewhat of a rarity. It's more pluralistic and has drawn immigrants from a wider diversity of sources than almost any country in the world.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so it's no surprise that we're having some struggles, particularly the Anglo-American, which is the dominant part of America. It's having struggles dealing with the pluralistic aspect.
especially from the Supreme Court view too, how did all these issues go to the Supreme Court and they say, how do we let people practice their religion, but also protect the minorities? Just such a balance. I love to watch how they try to decide those cases. You know, if a religious person can decline to serve certain people, but then the minority wants to be served, how do you keep both sides happy?
Like baking the cake.
Like baking the cake for gay couples, yeah. But that's at the heart of this Christian nationalism issue. How do we allow and do these universal moral principles, but not trod on minorities and their rights?
Well, I think personally, it's what drives us to become involved. What drives your motivation to become involved in anything that is to protect, you know, like when you get involved in something politically, what's driving you? Are you driven by anger because you want to make a statement or become radical in it? Or are you doing it because you feel like it's your job to do as a Christian? But I think, what drives us is so important, because I think a lot of people are driven into certain areas of service because they're mad and angry and they want they want an avenue to go into that they can express that.
Douglas County School Board,
So-
Protect my side and fight just for my side.
Douglas County School Board.
And that's why they get involved in it, is because, they can, and then I think they can rally the troops when they do that too, so.
All
Carol,
right.
I'd like to see us discuss justice. What is justice? And as I see it, it's the absence of injustice. So what is injustice under the Constitution? If you look at what is just and what is unjust, you've got room for a whole lot of diversity. And I'd like to see a discussion on what is justice.
good question. Good topic.
Because our courts, our rule of law, we're a country of laws. And based on just and unjust.
All right. Okay, yeah, you can pass those books around. Okay, jump to the next one.
We talked about.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. All right.
Justice for Alec Baldwin.
Some of the white Christian nationalistic stands. White Christian nationalism's enemies have changed from Indians and Catholics, the communists, the black radicals, the atheists, the Muslims, the socialists, and keep on moving and keep on adding. The movement has typically developed stances that derive from a particular interpretation of freedom, order, and violence. Do I hear?
Yeah, somebody's.
Something.
Yeah, somebody out there in the Zoom land? No, I guess
No,
not.
okay.
Okay, freedom is understood by some in a libertarian way as a freedom from restrictions, especially the government. Order is understood in a hierarchical way with white Christian men at the top. And violence is seen as a means of defending freedom and restoring order. And we remember the Charlottesville March, where the marchers were chanting various white nationalism.
Freedom worked until Standard Oil.
Right. Okay, jumping. You've seen this one before. This is the plot of the fertility rate in the United States. And we looked at this in an earlier lesson and showed where 2.2 is needed to no immigration to just maintain a level population. And that has not happened in the last several decades, many decades. Next one. And demographically, the data is just come in from the 2020 census and been analyzed in great detail. And this is the first time the white non-Hispanic population has dropped significantly. It dropped 8.6% since the 2010 census. And that plot over there with the colors, the bluer the color, the more diversity in the state. The lighter near the white is the less diversity in the state. And we can see where the states that have grown the most pretty much have more diversity. Okay, next one. For those that saw the movie South Pacific, there was an actor, John Kerr, in there who played Lieutenant Cable. And he sang a song in there that had the words in it. You've got to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made, people whose skin is a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. He also, a movie I'm going to recommend is Tea and Sympathy. And Alice and I have a DVD copy of it. But he won the 1954 Tony Award for his role in the Broadway production of that, where he is thought to be gay by some other people. He's not, but he was extremely persecuted because they thought he was gay. So it's a movie worth watching. Write that in your movies to see. Next one. Okay, let's get into talking about the differences between patriotism and nationalism. Patriotism is the love of the country. It's different from nationalism, which is an argument about how to define our country. So again, when you say I'm a patriot, to me, it says you must learn to love the land, the air, the people, the whole thing. It's the people, it's the whole thing.
The ideals.
Nationalism
Right,
The
can be
ideals too.
capsulized by saying, my country may she always be right, but my country right or wrong.
good point. Also, with the nationalist tries to say, well, the nation isn't really everybody. It's, give me a carving knife and I'm gonna draw with a marker a line around those groups, those states, those areas, those colors of people, those religions that I consider part of the country. If there's a Japanese, Chinese fellow living in Los Angeles, and he's just become a naturalized citizen, I don't really consider them part of the country, even though they're a citizen. So the nationalists tend to believe that nationalism starts with the belief that humanity is divisible into mutually distinct, internally coherent cultural groups that must share traits like language, religion, ethnicity, and culture. So again, it's drawing a tribal line around who belongs to the country. And the nationalists, the more extreme ones, believe that each of these groups should have their own governments, their own blocks of land, and there shouldn't be a United States that is pluralistic, that is becoming a melting pot and merging together people of many nations and colors.
What's your source for that?
Ascribe to,
That last.
that comes out of the one book, again, Please Fasten the Flag and Country. And it also comes out of,
This one?
yeah. And I think it also comes out of the Christianity Today article
Okay,
that I passed out. Okay, next one.
I'm just not familiar.
Okay. Again, nationalism versus patriotism. Patriotism is loyalty to one's constitution and political regime. Patriotism is animated by love, nationalism by dislike. So the patriot more says, I love these principles. I love mercy, justice, freedom. The nationalist is more focused on, I don't like these, I don't like that. I want to throw out this.
Don't you think that's been skewed though recently? That the patriotism now is identified with national. I mean, I'm a patriot. I've got
Yeah.
my
Right,
whatever sign up there. that
right,
Puts you way over on the right side.
right. Good point.
Mhm.
Okay. Interestingly enough, I want to look at that fourth bullet. This is a statement by Mitch McConnell just in the last couple of weeks. An admirable statement. There is no room in the Republican Party for anti-Semitism or white supremacy. Yeah. He said this in a little press conference just in the last 30 days.
He hasn't looked at it.
And it's so un-American,
All right. So
so
next one.
aligned with our tradition.
Excellent. Okay, there's a book we'll touch on in a few weeks when we get to our lesson on Lincoln. Life of a Klansman by Edward Ball. He wrote the book also, Slaves in the Family. So I'm recommending this book is worth reading. Next slide. It certainly shows some of the early roots of white supremacy in American history.
Like me.
Of course, we keep seeing expressions of the white nationalism. Idaho's had its problems. Kyle Chapman.
Sorry, hang on just a second.
Sure.
Reconnecting. How we doing? It happens. They're back with us.
Okay. Many Christian nationalists have declared, some Christian nationalists have declared their intention to dominate every aspect of American life, from government to education to the economy.
Hey,
40 years
Steve.
ago.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to interrupt. We lost.
All right.
Lost
Okay,
again.
you're here, but you lost the screen sharing. Yes, thank you, Susan.
Click.
There we go. We'll go back to sharing.
How did that?
There we go. Who knows? Can you
Four-
see it now, Susan?
The computers have a mind of their own.
Yes, they do.
We lost Susan again.
About 40 years ago, in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, I attended a Christian collegiate activity event, a group called Maranatha, which means, "Oh Lord, come again." And one of the songs they were singing is this one: "We are taking over, we are lifting up our God." And it wasn't just loose words for their songs. They actually had as an undergirding theology of that movement to make America a Christian nation. And literally, when they said "we are taking over," they announced their intention to bring very, very conservative Christians into every aspect of government, to control the governorship, the House,
When was that?
rules of life. This was, I was at that assembly in about 1970, 79, 80.
I mean, right era.
45.
All right, so next one. Okay. Of course, embracing Christianity to move ahead your political agenda occurred quite a bit in the 1896 Democratic Convention. William Jennings Bryan ran twice unsuccessfully for president, but he went up and made a national speech. He was talking about the gold standard. "You shall not press down the brow of labor, this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." And then as he was spoken, he went into a dramatic effect where he put his arms out, kind of imitated Christ on the cross. And he got slammed by, a lot of people loved it. He said, I'm for the little people, the common people, and I'm wearing a crown of thorns. But he did get slammed by at least one magazine that criticized his bringing the crucifixion of Jesus into his political message in such a way. Next one.
He was a populist.
Yeah. An interesting quote by Sinclair Lewis. This was years ago, many decades ago. He said, "When fascism comes to America, it will be wrapped in the flag and carrying a cross."
Wow.
And that right lower picture is a belt buckle that German soldiers, not all of them, wore into battle in World War I. Who knows German? God with us. God with us. Yeah. And you can see where they were using the Christian symbolism.
Kind of reminds me of, just real quick, the TV ads by the My Pillow guy. on TV. Whether you like him or not, I'm just saying that his TV ads, he's has Jesus' picture behind him on one side and a flag on the other, and then he's selling his pillows. And so just an interesting approach for selling your product. And it probably
He always
happens.
wears that cross too.
And he wears the cross.
Sure, that cross is shown in the photo.
And of course, at the January 6th insurrection, you can see the Jesus flag there on the left. And then we can see Jesus is Savior, Trump is my president. And here's an example of where white Christian nationalism has come in a very strong way to a very questionable political rally or even riot. So next one. The eagerness to fight appeal. If you look at Mike Pence, he's got, this book is now out on the newsstands or the bookstores, The Faith of Mike Pence. It's just come out. But when he was dueling a bit with Trump for the nomination, Pence definitely had the faith and evangelical credentials, no question about it. But Trump basically expressed the words, fight. I will fight, I will punch him out, I will sock it to him. And when it came to it, power versus piety, the division within Christianity, right now it looks like power is beating piety more often than not. And note the current situation in Brazil. Next slide. And I need to wrap it up. Just in the last 2 weeks in Brazil, a tremendously, I won't say evangelicals were the only force behind the rioting and the insurrection that has happened in Brazil. Many parties involved, but there's been a very, very powerful evangelical backing to the insurrection, I'll call it, in Brazil, where they stormed many of the government buildings, beat up some journalists. They're claiming that Bolsonaro did not lose the election. Yeah, claiming voter fraud, again, all those things with no evidence. But the parallels with some of the things here. So, but it looks like the wrong in my opinion, elements of the evangelical movement have really gotten into the Brazilian church.
Steve Bannon went down there, gave advice Bolsonaro.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's definitely one you want to
He's
read.
also been to Hungary.
It's an amazing parallel. Yeah. Okay. Again, back up one. We saw the white supremacy symbol brought into the Capitol, and the shaman is trying to bring a little more religion into his message. Thank the Heavenly Father for allowing us to send the message that this is our nation, not theirs. To which we need to ask him the question, well, who's us and who's them? Okay, next one. Okay. These are the indicators of Christian nationalism, and you can compose a Christian nationalism scale depending on, and let's talk about this. Which one of these do you adhere to or believe in? Consider the founding documents like the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution to be divinely inspired. Most of us consider that to be the case.
No.
2, the success of the U.S. is part of God's plan.
What's success?
Yes and no.
Yes and no. The federal government should declare the U.S. a Christian nation.
No.
No.
Okay. The federal government should advocate Christian values.
Yes.
My point there is to the extent that they represent basic universal moral
Yeah, don't
values.
exclude anybody.
Yeah, but
Exclude.
they shouldn't put a communion table at the end of the school lunch line. There's a difference. The federal government should enforce a strict separation of church and state. Absolutely.
Yes.
And I believe in that. The federal government should allow the display of religious symbols in public places.
Maybe.
And there we've got to be,
Either none or everybody.
Too much.
and the federal government should allow prayer in public schools.
Silent prayer would be all right.
And there's the kicker. What do you mean by prayer?
Right.
One person said, anybody that's taken this organic chemistry.
Led by the coach before the game.
Yeah, clearly if it's a school assembly and the leader of the assembly gives an altar call. That happened in West Virginia. They invited in a speaker to West Virginia public school and he gave a evangelical message and Yeah.
Well, that happened at the Columbine Memorial Service at West Bowles Theater.
Okay.
Breckin Graham gave a
An
altar,
altar call.
asked people to accept Jesus.
But Congress and state legislators still open their sessions with prayer,
That's true.
but they invite different faith ministers. They invite Jews and Christians and others.
Well,
It's my understanding.
just recently, when the Buffalo Bills guy died on the field, and they all went to their knees and prayed, it was an acceptable thing. But when, what was his name? The other football player that,
Somebody object to it?
oh, yeah, in fact, he got all kinds of, what was his name? He's a-
Yeah, yeah.
Kneel. I can't
Get
think
thrown
of
out of the
his
league,
name.
but nobody
Yes.
would.
Colin Kaepernick.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Well, no, there was no, this was a guy that was praying. And he used to play for Denver, but for a short time.
Oh, Tim
Tim
Tebow.
Tebow.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, there was no. I knew it.
Yeah, okay.
But they use these 7 questions to, there's a scale depending, the answer might be yes, no, maybe. And to develop a Christian nationalism scale that basically is on a 0 to 24 or 0 to 28. And we're gonna just quickly blitz through 4 or 5 positions. Next slide. Yeah, this shows on this scale, you can see the numbers up there. Increasing numbers, 0 is on the left side, 24 or 28 is on the right side, and where in general the denominations lie in terms of, and we find the Pentecostal and the Baptist scoring the highest on Christian nationalism. And we basically see the United Church of Christ and the Presbyterians scoring down in the low end. Methodist is somewhere in the middle. Interesting. There's, you can look at that. Okay, let's finish her up here.
Yeah.
Next one, perceptions of discrimination. They asked the question, how much discrimination will whites experience? And you can see that if they asked the black folk and the white folk. And as you go up on your Christian nationalism score, you're far more likely to believe that whites are discriminated against. How much discrimination will blacks experience? The black community, no matter where they fall on the scale, pretty much says it's about the same. But the white community says, as you become more and more white Christian nationalism in your score, you say that, yeah, blacks aren't discriminated against. Next one. This is just a basic history quiz, nothing to do with religion. They just give you a quiz. And they find that your history test score goes way down as you become more and more Christian nationalist. That means you must be embracing either ideas that aren't true or not getting, yeah. So Alfred E. Newman is way up there on the, yeah. Next one. I did a lesson on the removal of Christian, or not Christian, but Confederate statues. And we see that as your Christian nationalism score goes up, you become more and more in opposition to taking down Confederate statues. And if you're a historian, as your Christian nationalism scale goes up, you believe less and less that slavery was the primary cause of the war. Next one. Trusting for your medical advice on COVID-19 and Trump versus the medical community. And as your nationalism score goes up, you believe the scientists less and less, and you believe the politicians more and more. Okay, next one. Voter suppression. As you become more and more Christian nationalists, you believe less and less that there is a voter suppression problem. Next one. January 6th. If you're really high on Christian nationalism, you tend to believe that the Black Lives Matter and Antifa were in the crowd and started the violence. And if you're not scoring high on Christian nationalism, you tend to feel it's strong. Next one, gerrymandering. Those that are low on Christian nationalism think the popular vote should win, the vote winner should be the president, and we must be addressing gerrymandering. If you're way up there on the Christian nationalism scale, you think the electoral vote guy should win the election, and there isn't a gerrymandering problem. Okay, that wraps it up. Bring the next slide up.
Okay, we got 5 minutes left.
Yeah, again, those are the 7 indicators. So let's get some comment. Hopefully,
I'd like us to consider, we discussed the influx of the Hispanic, but we must remember Hispanics, 99% are Catholic, which is a Christian religion. Now,
Absolutely.
substitute this influx of Hispanics for Muslims, and how would the country feel regarding that? In other words, would we feel threatened? Think about that.
okay. I can personally say, I can see where Muslim immigration worries people more, because many of the Islam values clash with what I call the universal human values.
Yeah,
Sharia law,
Sharia law and
suppression of, so yeah, that,
I work with a Muslim RM, and they can have up to 3 wives. Now, how is that going to threaten? If, let's say you substitute the Hispanic movement, the influx of Hispanics for Muslims. And these people believe they can have 3 wives, or their laws are different than our constitutional laws.
Okay.
Now, would we see that a greater threat? See, I don't see this a Hispanic movement as a threat. They're Christian.
okay.
Now,
And
that Muslim is what is the threat of Muslimism to Christianity?
Yeah, good question. Let's let Susan get in here. Go
Yeah.
I
ahead,
think we ought to
Susan.
discuss
Okay,
that.
I just want to say that I think that the same range that we see in Christianity is seen in Islam as well. And so to imply that all Muslims agree with having 3 wives is it's a big overgeneralization. So you want to be really careful about not taking a broad swath of generalizations for Islam, because it just doesn't apply.
Is Sharia law a minority among Muslims, or is it a majority?
Yeah, well, I can tell you in Canada, which is an incredibly multicultural society and very much of a mosaic as opposed to a melting pot, where we have much more tolerance. We don't hear a lot about Sharia, and we have a huge Muslim population.
Okay.
So the Muslims may pick and choose from their constitution about what suits them, maybe.
Right, it's just like Christianity. There's a range.
I kind of think it's understandable to folks who want to have a Christian nation with Christian laws like a Muslim country would there, to protect the way the cultural values that are in place now. People are afraid of groups coming in and changing the culture. And I think that's where it stems from. Let me go to Jim first and then Gene.
Well, we hear a lot of criticism of our elections,
Yeah.
and I wonder, probably members of our class have worked on elections, and I wonder if they have any comments about their experience. Has anyone worked on elections in the class?
Yeah, but Colorado is very different than a lot of other states, so I don't think that looking at elections or people that have worked on elections in this state is comparable to Florida or Mississippi or Alabama.
But it all works
I've worked
together.
on elections on 2 different occasions,
Uh-huh.
and it was composed of both Republicans and Democrats. And that was a fine experience, I thought, of our American democracy at work.
Good. We've got just a few minutes left, Gene and then Jim.
Well, I think you're right, Steve. Here. Ron, this is a worldwide phenomenon that's going on. It's not just here in America, Western Europe. Look what's happening in Israel as we speak with Netanyahu, what he's doing to the Supreme Court. Putin is a born-again Russian Orthodox, born again. The enmeshment between religion and nationalism and patriotism, there's a lot of incest between patriotism and nationalism. It's a matter of power and privilege.
Yeah.
If we are beneficiaries, who's white people, there has been privilege, there has been power, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist, right, Ron? White people are frightened and fearful. The demographics are changing. So what are the reasons for the upsetness and the fear? This is a worldwide phenomenon, and religion gets caught up in the midst of this, and we're privileged. Now, if you're a true Christian, not a theoretical Christian, you get into that dilemma of it's the right thing to do, but not in my backyard. You start messing with the economic systems by which people have prospered and have influence, you start rattling the cage.
Right.
Why do we have nationalism? White nationalism. It's a worldwide phenomenon. So it is fear. You're right. And you got to really be a good Christian to give up your position of power and privilege.
Right.
That was part of Mark's sermon today. Was it not?
Well, the love of power.
Yeah.
Is universal in fear.
Yep, so universally.
Building
Jim, go
on what
ahead.
Gene was saying, the one thing that I find missing in a lot of these discussions, well, in all of these discussions, is the quest for wealth. And the number of people that have assumed leadership positions in one of these conservative organizations, not because out of principle and belief in these things, because I really believe that Donald Trump didn't believe half of the stuff, but he was saying, but he assumed leadership in these areas because he could manipulate a large group of people for very easily if he was able to do this. And I think that wealth, the quest for profit, the quest for money is the bottom line that people tend to ignore, that how this feeds into actually obscene wealth. People that are making so much money that it is beyond average people's comprehension. And by doing that, by manipulating these people and assuming this nationalistic posture, I don't think it has, I think a large number of the people that are involved in these things have no moral principles, that they are just manipulating in order to get to the bottom line.
Yeah, the love of power.
Power and money.
Power assumes.
Yeah, you take BlackRock, Vanguard, the power that these people can, with their money, will influence laws the way that
Sure,
our politicians vote.
right. We need to wrap up. Any final thoughts? Anybody?
Well, I was
Jim,
gonna say
real quick.
that the white nationalists are shoveling against the tide. They're not realists. If they take a look at the world's population, the white people are a very small minority.
Yeah.
Just go to Google and Google the brown or colored nations in the world.
Yeah.
And it's far outnumbered the whites. So in a couple hundred years, I think we'll all be the same color.
Different world. They'll all be the same color, okay?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
It's just a matter of.
All righty, thank you.
It's just like we can integrate, right, just so we get into
Yeah.
time.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Ron.
Next week.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Susan.